Jacob, our forefather, constantly has to deal with the darkness and murkiness and evil of a world that challenges him throughout his lifetime. It is Yaakov who has to deal with a brother who wishes to kill him, a father-in-law who deceives him again and again in the decrepit place of Haran. But notwithstanding the darkness that he has to endure, Yaakov rises out of the battle, out of the challenge, with added strength, with added growth. Yaakov establishes the 12 tribes of Israel, even in the darkest of places. Yaakov introduces us to the prayer of the night, Ma'ariv, giving us the ability to connect to Hashem and to be attached even in the darkest time of night. And this week we read about him about to meet his brother, and prior to that, he remains alone by Avek Ish Imo, and a man contends with him, fights with him. There's a lot of debate as to who this man is, the angel of Esau, some angelical force, some spiritual force and power that wrestles with him throughout the darkness of the night. But Yaakov endures, and notwithstanding the fact that he's injured and for a period in his life is limping as a result of the injuries, there is a discussion between him and the enemy in the morning as the dawn breaks and the light begins to shine. And Jacob turns to the force that contended with him and says, Ma Shemecha, what is your name? And the force, this angelical evil force, says to Jacob, I do not have a name. And what the commentaries explain is that Jacob is looking at the enemy and saying, what do you really stand for? Give me your identity. Define yourself. Describe yourself so that I can know you better and know how to deal with you. And the force of evil in the world responds and says, I don't have a name. I don't have a defined personality. I morph myself into every possible identity that can bring about the destruction of you, Jacob, and what you represent in the world. It is a world today in which we have evil morphing into so many different guises. We have a world in which there's supposedly a desire for human rights, for children's rights, for rights of women, for nationhood. We have forces that want to fight against genocide, against racism. The forces of the world seem to have identities that talk about things that are good and things that are appropriate. And yet we live in a world in which we see the emptiness and the shallowness of these identities that are put forward in front of us. In a world in which we have 16 days of activism against the violence against women and children, we have a world that does not shudder when they see the images of children who have been kidnapped from their homes, being used as bargaining chips, seeing dead children being passed over from the enemy who kidnapped them from their bedrooms. And the world is not screaming and shouting, how do we allow this destruction to have taken place? When we see that there is, as in the verses of this week's portion, the capture of Dinah, a Jewish woman who is raped and captured, and yet the world has seen the violence against women. They've seen the rape that took place on October 7th. And yet the world is not screaming and saying, this is what we represent. We are standing for the rights of women and the preservation of women, and certainly against the violence against women. And yet there is a muffled silence. In a world when we're expressing the importance of nationhood and preserving nationhood and making sure that every nation has their place, they're crying about from the river to the sea, which means there is no place for nationhood, for the Jewish people to have the only Jewish state in the entire world existing. We preach genocide and how we should fight genocide, and at the same time, we watch genocide take place in front of our eyes, and so much of the world was silent. We've seen denial of the events that took place. We've seen leaders say in front of the world, there are no children that have been kidnapped and captured. We heard it being said publicly in our own country. And then we saw the images of those self-same people handing back the babies and the children that they ripped and wrenched away from them. What is your name, says Jacob? What is your identity? Tell me who you are. But we see that evil morphs from one identity to another identity because the underlying identity is that there is no specific guise. There is a hatred of the Jewish people, a hatred of Yaakov, and a desire to eradicate and to destroy. And ultimately, Jacob turns to the evil force that he's contending with the whole night, and he says, bless me. And what he means by bless me is, I will not emerge from this as just a survivor. I'm not going to come out of this the same Jacob I was that went into the battle. The battles of the night and the darkness are going to result in myself being transformed. As we see, the evil force has to say, you will no longer be called Jacob, who has to deal with the darkness. You have a new name, and your name is Yisrael. You have been able to overcome the forces of evil, and you have survived and you have succeeded. You have a new name, Yisrael. The darkness and the difficulties that we are contending with, so painful as they are, will ultimately result in the transformation of our people Israel. That we will recognize and see the abilities and the strengths and the hidden power that we have to unite together, to stand together, to know our identity for good and for values of Torah and mitzvot and for love of one another and for the love of our people and for the love of our land. May Hashem give us the strength to see through the darkness and ultimately embrace the growth and the transformation and the success of redemption that is standing beyond the darkness that we presently have to contend with. Have a beautiful Shabbos.